For years, I pretended to be poor, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see the truth. At 58, you learn that money changes people faster than time ever could. After my husband died, everyone assumed I was left with nothing. I let them believe that. I wore the same old cardigan. I stopped coloring my hair. I spoke about tight budgets and small pensions. I became invisible on purpose. The truth, my husband left me more than enough. Investments, savings, and most importantly, this house, fully paid, fully mine. But my son didn't know that. Daniel moved back in 2 years ago with his wife, Clara, just for a few months, Mom, he said, until we get back on our feet. I smiled and opened the door. At first, Clara was sweetness wrapped in perfume. She brought me tea. She called me Mom. She told neighbors how grateful they were. Then the whispers began. She doesn't contribute. She just sits around. She's living off us. I would stand at the top of the stairs, pretending not to hear. Every word sank into my chest like a slow needle. One evening, I heard something that changed everything. We can't build a future like this, Clara said sharply. This house should be ours, not hers. Daniel didn't answer immediately. That silence was louder than any insult. A week later, I found documents on the dining table. Property valuation papers, market estimates, notes about transfer possibilities. Transfer. They were planning something. I didn't confront them. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I made tea. I asked Clara about her day. I watched Daniel avoid my eyes. Because here is the thing about being underestimated, it gives you power. If they believed I was weak, poor, dependent, then they would never see what I was about to do. And when I finally decided to act, it wouldn't be with anger. It would be with precision. But first, I needed proof. And what I discovered 3 nights later made my hands tremble, not from fear, but from clarity. 3 nights after I overheard their plan, I began my quiet investigation. I wasn't naive. I had spent decades observing people, reading their subtle tells, understanding their greed. I had always known that money changes hearts before it changes minds. And now I needed to see exactly how far they would go. I followed Clara's routines. The way she whispered with Daniel in the kitchen. The notes she left on the dining table. Her little hints about selling unnecessary things or downsizing my belongings. Every slip, every careless word, I recorded in my memory like a meticulous archivist. I began to test them. A little here, a little there. I would pretend to misplace my own documents, leaving small hints that I was forgetful. I would struggle to pay a utility bill or complain about my old car breaking down. Clara smiled each time, thinking I was helpless, and Daniel nodded obediently. They were so certain I was powerless. But the truth is, Daniel had never truly seen me. He never knew the woman behind the calm, quiet exterior. He never knew the strength that had carried me through decades of betrayal, of hardship, of grief. And Clara, oh, Clara thought herself clever. She believed the world revolved around her ambitions, blind to the cunning patience of someone underestimated. Then I made my first move. I accessed the property documents they had hidden in the drawer. Not to destroy, not yet, only to confirm my absolute ownership. Every signature, every clause, every fine print was mine. They had no power. Not yet, but soon. Soon, they would learn. I decided to plant small seeds of doubt. A misplaced document, a hint dropped in casual conversation, a comment about how much a property like this could fetch if sold. Claire's eyes would flicker with greed each time. Daniel's brow would furrow. I could almost hear the wheels turning in their minds, but they didn't suspect me. Not at all. I began documenting everything. Their conversations, their plans, even their little threats. About moving me to a smaller place. I had cameras in discreet corners and old-fashioned notebooks in which I wrote everything, every detail meticulously. And then came the night that truly shocked me. I saw them arguing about the house in the middle of the living room. Clara insisted, "It has to be sold. We can't wait any longer. Mom will never agree, but it's ours to take if necessary." Daniel hesitated, caught between loyalty and temptation. And in that moment, I realized I had the upper hand. They believed the game was theirs, but it had been mine from the very beginning. I smiled quietly to myself. Soon, I would show them that. Underestimating an old woman was the biggest mistake of their lives. And as I lay in bed that night, I whispered to the shadows of my room, "They think I am helpless. They are about to learn the cost of underestimation." The next morning, I served breakfast as if nothing had happened. Clara smiled politely, but there was a subtle edge in her tone when she asked, "Mom, did you check those old bills I left for you?" I smiled back, pouring tea, pretending to fumble with the sugar. "Oh yes, I've been meaning to. It's just so many papers," I said, letting my voice sound tired, almost weak. Their eyes lit up with triumph. They thought they were winning. After they left for work, I walked quietly into the study, my sanctuary, and reviewed my evidence again. Every conversation, every slip of greed, every plan to manipulate me, all written down. Daniel believed he could control the situation. Clara believed she was untouchable, both so blind. I thought of the years I had spent alone after my husband's death, carrying burdens, facing isolation. People assumed old women are frail, helpless, predictable. But I was far from predictable. Every night, I had planned, observed, and now it was time to sharpen my strategy. That afternoon, I decided to test them further. I left a small envelope on the dining table. On it, I wrote in casual handwriting, "Some bills might be missing. Please check carefully." By evening, I had observed Clara rummaging through drawers, her brow furrowed, whispering curses under her breath. Daniel hovered nearby, unsure, anxious. The envelope had done its work. Greed had made them careless. Then, the unthinkable happened. Clara confronted me directly in the kitchen, her voice low but venomous. "Mom, why are you pretending like you're helpless? We know you're hiding something. We know you have money, and you won't tell us." I looked at her calmly, my face serene, my hands folding and unfolding a napkin as if I were utterly innocent. "Oh, Clara, you know me. I've always struggled," I said softly, my voice a gentle blade. "I live on a small pension. It's all I have." Her eyes narrowed. Daniel stepped in, protective yet conflicted. "Mom, it's okay. Maybe we misunderstood." I nodded, letting them believe for now. They didn't know that. This was exactly how I wanted it to let their arrogance and greed fester. Let them think they were close to breaking me, close to taking what they believed was theirs. That night, I stayed awake long after the house had gone quiet. I drafted letters, imaginary letters, messages I would use later to create panic. Documents I would reveal at precisely the right moment. Every plan they had made against me was now ammunition in my hands. And as the house slept, I whispered to myself, "They will learn." But patience. Patience is my ally. They won't see it coming until it's too late. Because revenge, my dear viewers, isn't about haste. It's about precision. And I had all the time, all the knowledge, and all the power they would ever underestimate. Days passed, each one a careful dance. I continued my act of weakness, wearing the same faded clothes, fumbling with small chores, letting them think I was fragile and dependent. Clara's eyes sparkled with triumph whenever she thought she had cornered me. Daniel's hesitations were growing, but he was trapped between loyalty and greed always wins eventually. One afternoon, I found Clara whispering to a real estate agent on the phone. I pretended to water the plants in the hallway while listening carefully. Her words were sharp, calculated. "Yes, the property. We'll move her out quietly. She won't fight. Everything can be done discreetly." I felt a quiet fury rise inside me, but outwardly, I remained serene. I wiped imaginary dust from a leaf and hummed softly, as if lost in my own world. They didn't see me. They didn't see that every move they made was now being meticulously logged. Every whisper, every sneer, every plan, all of it would be used, one by one, to turn their own arrogance against them. That evening, I called Daniel into the study under the pretense of discussing a minor bill. He entered tense. I offered him tea and smiled gently. "Daniel, have you thought about what I said last week?" I asked casually. He frowned. "Mom, we didn't want to upset you. It's just..." He hesitated. "Just what?" I prompted softly, leaning back in my chair. "Just, we thought you might not be able to handle the mortgage adjustments. We thought..." His words trailed off. I let him stew in silence for a moment. Then I leaned forward, my eyes locking with his. "Oh, Daniel," I said softly. "You know me. I've always managed. I always will. You don't understand, do you? There's more to this house than you think." His face paled. Clara, meanwhile, had returned from her errands. She peeked through the doorway, eyes glinting with suspicion. She had sensed my calm, my quiet power, and it unnerved her. I smiled. "Go on. Look around. Check anything you want. But remember, some things aren't what they seem." They left the room in confusion. I watched from the study window as they whispered hurriedly outside. Clara was clearly panicking. Daniel was torn, unsure whether to defend his mother or his wife. The perfect storm was building, and I was at the center. Calm, calculating, untouchable. That night, I prepared the letters, documents, and a detailed record of their every plan and betrayal. I imagine the shock on their faces when they realized that the old, quiet woman they thought helpless had been steps ahead all along. Because that's the key to revenge. It's not in shouting. It's in control, patience, precision, observation, and timing. As I lay in bed, the house silent around me, I whispered into the darkness. They will learn. Soon enough. That underestimating me was the gravest mistake of their lives. And with that thought, I smiled faintly. Days turned into weeks. Every interaction became a careful test of their greed and patience. Clara's sharpness never ceased to amaze me. She thought she was always 3 steps ahead. Daniel? Well, he remained torn between loyalty to me and his desire to appease his wife. But greed has a way of clouding judgment, and I intended to let it consume them entirely. One morning, I casually mentioned to Clara that a neighbor had asked about the market value of houses in our area. "It's remarkable how much some homes are worth," I said lightly, folding my hands. Her eyes flickered, curiosity mixed with greed, and I smiled, letting her stew in it. Every subtle hint was a test. That evening, I watched from the study as she pored over her notes, muttering, "Mom, she must be hiding something. There's no way she lives like this on a pension." Daniel hovered near the doorway uneasily. I let them believe I was clueless. I even pretended to misplace a few bills, scattering them slightly on the desk, little nudges to keep their paranoia growing. Every whisper, every suspicious glance they exchanged fed the story I had been building for years. Then, as they argued quietly about what to do next, I caught myself smiling. The thought struck me, they would never see the final reveal coming. The same house they plotted to take, the same woman they thought helpless, had been silently observing and planning her own moves all along. It occurred to me, as I sipped my tea, that some of you watching this story might enjoy the thrill of seeing justice served in clever ways. If you want to hear more stories like this, stories of patience, intelligence, and revenge, consider subscribing. I promise the journey isn't over, and what comes next will be worth it. That night, I wrote a detailed plan. Letters to drop, subtle clues to reveal, conversations to leak, every element calculated. I was no longer pretending to be poor. I was preparing the stage for my revelation. As I locked the study door and looked at the house around me, I whispered to myself, every plan they've made, every underestimation, every careless word. It's all ammunition now. Soon they will realize the truth, and it will be too late to undo it. And as the moonlight touched the faded walls of my living room, I felt a quiet thrill. The old, quiet woman they thought they could manipulate was about to take her power back, and they wouldn't even see it coming. The tension was building. The storm was near. And when it finally hit, they would learn that underestimating me wasn't just a mistake. It was their undoing. The tension in the house had become almost unbearable. Every glance from Clara carried suspicion. Every word from Daniel carried hesitation. They were trapped in a making band. I was the spider watching patiently, silently, as it tightened around them. One afternoon, I accidentally left a small envelope on the kitchen table. Nothing fancy, just a hint, a whisper of possibility. Inside, I placed copies of property deeds, letters I had written over the years, and a few notes about investments they assumed I knew nothing about. Clara found it first. Her eyes widened as she flipped through the pages, and I could hear her shallow breathing from the next room. Daniel entered, curious, trying to act calm, but his unease betrayed him. "Mom, what is this?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I smiled sweetly, as if I had just found a misplaced teacup. "Oh, those? Just some old papers I was organizing. Nothing important." Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the fear she couldn't hide. Daniel looked at me, eyes wide, realization slowly dawning. They had thought I was fragile, dependent, even ignorant. And now, with one small envelope, I had shown them just how wrong they were. I let them stew for the evening. I made no threats, no accusations, just calm, quiet observation. Their panic grew with each passing minute. Their minds racing, their greed turning into fear. That night, I prepared the final move. I sent subtle hints to friends and legal advisors I had quietly consulted over the years. Conversations were arranged, meetings coincidentally scheduled, all pointing to the fact that the house, the property, and every asset I had were untouchable, firmly in my name. Daniel tried to argue the next morning. "Mom, we can work this out. We just wanted to help." I laughed softly, a sound that carried years of patience, pain, and understanding. "Help? Oh, Daniel, you never needed to help me. You needed to learn that underestimating someone is dangerous." And Clara, my dear, greed has a way of blinding even the cleverest minds. Her face paled, every plan she had meticulously crafted unraveling in seconds. And there I stood, calm, collected, untouchable. The house, the money, the years of careful observation and planning, all mine. They had tried to manipulate me, belittle me, push me aside. And now they were left with nothing but the shock of realization. I let the silence stretch, letting them feel the weight of their misjudgment. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to scream. The power of patience, intelligence, and quiet cunning was far more devastating. As I walked past them that evening, I whispered softly, not for their ears, but for mine. "The game is almost over. Soon they will see that the old woman they dismissed holds the keys to everything." The day finally came. The house was quiet, but the air was thick with tension. Daniel and Clara moved about nervously, exchanging whispered glances, their plans completely unraveling. They had thought themselves clever, certain that I was weak, helpless, and dependent. How wrong they had been. I entered the living room carrying a tray of tea, my hands steady, my expression calm. Clara flinched at my approach, her eyes darting nervously to Daniel as if to find an ally. There was none. The spell of their arrogance had broken. The house belonged to me. And they had no claim, no leverage, no escape from the truth. I placed the tray down and smiled softly. "You both seem tense," I said casually, as though we were discussing the weather. "Is something bothering you?" Clara opened her mouth, then closed it, unsure how to respond. Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line, guilt and astonishment battling in his eyes. "Mom, we didn't know." Daniel started, his voice faltering. I shook my head, letting a quiet laugh escape me, not loud, not harsh, just a gentle sound that carried years of patience and wisdom. You didn't know. Oh, Daniel, Clara. The mistake wasn't in what you didn't know. The mistake was in believing I couldn't see, that I couldn't plan, that I couldn't act. I walked slowly to the window, letting them watch me with unease. All these years, I pretended. I acted frail. I let you believe you were in control. And while you plotted, whispered, and schemed, I collected everything, evidence, documents, observations, letters, every little plan you made against me. Clara gasped, clutching her hands. You knew. I turned to her, eyes steady and cold as steel. I always knew. Every word, every look, every thought you believed hidden. It was all mine. They sank into their chairs, shock and realization washing over them. The arrogance, the disrespect, the plans to push me aside, all crumbling at once. Then I smiled, soft and victorious. The house, the investments, every little asset, all under my name, yours. None. You wanted to move me out, to take what wasn't yours, to make me invisible. But I am here. I am strong. And you learned too late. That underestimating me was the gravest mistake of your lives. Daniel's voice shook. Mom, I never imagined. I placed my hand over the table, steady and unwavering. It's not imagination, Daniel. It's reality. Every action, every decision, every scheme. It has consequences. And the greatest lesson, never underestimate an old woman who has learned patience, observation, and cunning. I looked out the window, the sunlight spilling into the room, and for the first time in years, I felt the full weight of my freedom, the quiet power I had built, the careful steps of my revenge, the patience that all culminated in this moment. They had tried to manipulate me. They had tried to belittle me. They had tried to take what was mine. And now they were left with the truth. I had always been the one in control. I turned to Daniel and Clara one last time, my voice soft but firm. Learn from this. Respect what you cannot measure. And remember, patience is stronger than force. And as I walked slowly toward the study, leaving them to digest the reality, I whispered to myself with satisfaction, the game is over. Justice has been served. Power reclaimed. Until next time, see you in the next video.